On the morning of April the 6th, 1933, millions of Americans woke up as criminals, not because they had stolen anything, but because they owned gold. Yesterday, it was their right. Today, it was a federal crime. A new law had turned possession of gold into an act of treason, punishable by 10 years in prison. In a single stroke of the pen, President Franklin D. Roosevelt transformed gold, the very symbol of American wealth, into contraband. And with that stroke began one of the largest legalized robberies in human history. This is the story of how, in just 30 days, ordinary citizens willingly handed over 3,600 tons of gold to their own government, and how almost none of them realized they were being deceived. The year was 1933. America was drowning in despair. 4 years after the Wall Street crash, the Great Depression had devoured everything: jobs, savings, homes, hope itself. Factories stood silent. Bread lines stretched for blocks. Banks collapsed daily. For millions, faith in the system had evaporated. There was one thing they still trusted. Gold. Gold was real. Gold didn't vanish like paper promises. In the chaos of the Depression, gold became a refuge, the last symbol of stability. People hid coins in coffee tins, buried bars in gardens, tucked them beneath floorboards. Gold was security, the one thing the government couldn't take away. Until it did. When Roosevelt entered the White House in March 1933, the nation was collapsing. The banking system was on life support. Every day, thousands of Americans demanded gold from their banks, trading paper dollars for coins. But there was a problem. The United States didn't have enough gold left. Since 1879, the country had lived under the gold standard, meaning every dollar in circulation had to be backed by a specific amount of gold stored in the Treasury. The rule kept governments honest. They couldn't simply print money at will. By 1933, that honesty had become a trap. The Federal Reserve's reserves were vanishing. If people kept demanding gold, the U.S. dollar itself would collapse. And Roosevelt, a pragmatic, confident man, decided the only way to save the system was to break the rules. To save America, he would have to take its gold. April 5th, 1933. Inside the Oval Office, Roosevelt lit a cigarette and stared at the papers on his desk. The nation was desperate. The banks were bleeding. He signed his name, and history changed forever. Executive Order Number 6102, forbidding the hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates within the continental United States. The law's meaning was simple and brutal. Within 25 days, every American was required to surrender all gold to the government. No exceptions, except for a few. You could keep wedding rings, dental gold, a handful of rare coins, or tiny amounts for industrial use. Everything else belonged to the state. The government set the price at $20.67 per ounce, and you couldn't negotiate. It didn't matter if the market price was higher. The deal was non-negotiable. If you refused, a fine of $10,000, 10 years in prison, or both. In 1933, the average American earned about $1,600 a year. That fine was the equivalent of 6 years' salary, and 10 years in prison was more than many murderers served. But Roosevelt knew fear alone wasn't enough. He needed belief. Within days, a massive campaign rolled out across the country. Newspapers published front-page stories calling gold hoarding selfish and unpatriotic. Radio hosts urged citizens to do their duty, to surrender gold and save America. Posters appeared in banks and post offices. Your patriotic duty. Surrender your gold for the recovery of our nation. Everywhere, the message was the same. Good citizens obey, bad citizens hoard. And it worked. Americans, already broken by years of crisis, believed this was their contribution to national recovery. They lined up to hand over the only thing of value they had left, their gold. They thought they were helping rebuild the nation. They were, in fact, being robbed blind. By May 1st, 1933, lines stretched outside banks across the country. Families carried boxes of coins passed down from grandparents. Small-town farmers brought sacks of double eagles, coins minted from California gold. Each coin told a story of labor, of heritage, of the dream that hard work meant security. Now, those dreams were exchanged for paper bills, bills that, even as they were printed, were losing value by the day. In just 30 days, Americans surrendered 2.97 million ounces of gold, worth about $118 million at the time, roughly $10 billion in today's money. Including corporate and bank gold, the total reached 3,173 tons. To visualize that, that's more than China's entire gold reserves today, and almost double that of Russia. Stacked into standard bars, that gold would rise higher than Mount Everest. If sold at modern prices, it would be worth $395 billion, enough to build 26 nuclear plants or buy all of San Francisco's real estate 3 times over. But the most shocking part came next. Less than a year later, on January 30th, 1934, Roosevelt signed another law, the Gold Reserve Act. Overnight, the government raised the official gold price from $20.67 to $35 per ounce. That's a 70% increase. The same gold citizens had been forced to sell was now worth almost twice as much. The profit? $2.8 billion, an astronomical sum at the time. To put that in perspective, the entire federal budget of 1934 was $6 billion. Nearly half of all government spending that year was financed by the gold it had confiscated. The United States had literally rebuilt its finances by robbing its own people. Not everyone surrendered quietly. One man dared to fight. Frederick Barber Campbell, a successful businessman from San Francisco, refused to hand over his gold, worth more than $200,000. He hired the best lawyers and sued the government, claiming the confiscation violated the Fifth Amendment, which protects citizens from the seizure of private property without just compensation. His case went all the way to the Supreme Court. But in 1935, the justices ruled against him, not only against Campbell, but against the very idea of monetary justice. The court declared that Congress had the constitutional right to regulate the value of money. In simple terms, the government could change the value of the dollar at will, even if it destroyed private wealth. Campbell lost everything. During one hearing, he collapsed in court from a heart attack. His case became a warning. Resistance was useless. After the ruling, the government made sure everyone got the message. The FBI launched investigations into gold hoarders. Banks were required to report suspicious deposits. Neighbors informed on neighbors. In just 3 years, thousands of criminal cases were opened. Many ended with fines or imprisonment. For ordinary Americans, fear replaced freedom. The message was clear. The system served the state, not the citizen. Now that the U.S. government possessed thousands of tons of gold, it needed somewhere to hide it. In 1936, construction began on a secret vault in Kentucky. The cost? $560,000, but no expense was spared. Walls over a meter thick, reinforced with steel and concrete. A 20-ton door with a lock so complex that no single person knows the full combination. Armed guards, minefields, round-the-clock surveillance. Even in the 1930s, Fort Knox was a fortress of paranoia. By 1941, more than 650 million ounces of gold lay behind its walls, over half of all U.S. reserves. Gold that, just years earlier, had belonged to ordinary families. Fort Knox became more than a vault. It was a monument, not to security, but to the price of obedience. Economists still argue about that question. Some say Roosevelt's gold policy stabilized the dollar and accelerated recovery from the Depression. Others argue it was an immoral betrayal, a violation of the trust that bound citizens to their government. Whatever the truth, the consequences were permanent. The gold standard was gone. The U.S. dollar was now backed not by gold, but by faith. Faith in the very system that had just confiscated wealth from its people. And faith, once broken, is hard to restore. Today, the U.S. government claims to hold 8,933 tons of gold, most of it still inside Fort Knox, but no one really knows for sure. The last public audit was in 1974. For decades, Americans have wondered, is the gold still there? Was it ever there? Perhaps the same government that once deceived its people out of their gold continues to deceive them today, or perhaps the real theft was never the gold at all, but the illusion of freedom it represented. They called it recovery. History remembers it as the day America robbed itself.